I think that I gave my salams a little bit early. I had assumed our parenting talk was over, and then after I finished saying salam to everybody, I realized that there were still many things I hadn't said about parenting that are useful to hear. And so we will finish the talk now with the things that I left out. I got a little too enthusiastic, I think, about the prospects of how wonderful the world is going to be in the future when we have a fully and truly Islamic world, that took my attention away from the actual topic that I was speaking on. But it will make the talk more interesting, I think, to have that part in it. One of the really critical aspects, as I had been talking about, that anytime anyone wants to make a change, or you want to help your child make a change, you have to do so by changing their thinking. There is no way for a human being to change unless the human being's thinking changes. And it's just one of these givens in the world. It is the way the world is set up. If your thinking does not change, you do not change. And one of the things that I mentioned, but I didn't give probably enough mention to, and mention about specifically how it should be done, is on the concept of contemplation of Allah, contemplation of the creation of Allah. I'm sorry. In Sufi techniques for becoming close to Allah, there are mainly two parts: remembrance of Allah, which has to do with specifically remembering in an intimate way Allah Himself, and the other part is called contemplation on the creation of Allah. And I think a lot of people have missed the point, or have never heard the point on what contemplation of the creation of Allah really means. When we talk about the creation of Allah, we are specifically talking about His physical creation, His physical world, the physical universe around us. That this is what we contemplate. And to contemplate means to think deeply about. And contemplation of the creation of Allah's physical world does not mean to sit there and sort of say to yourself, with your thoughts, Allah created the physical world, Allah created the physical world, Allah created the physical world. This is not contemplation on the creation of Allah. What is meant here, and what the Sufis, the scholars, have done in their contemplation of the creation of Allah, is they look at the most minute detail they know. And a long time ago, we didn't have a lot of the knowledge we have today through modern science. A lot of the facts of modern science, which allow us to have a very deep knowledge, very intimate knowledge of the creation of Allah. But we are supposed to look at it that way. For example, those of you who have seen the whole series of tapes would have seen the more scientific tapes based on modern physics, or CDs based on modern physics, where I discuss the way that Allah brings the electron to the nucleus of an atom, to a nucleus. In other words, brings an electron to a proton in the simplest sense, and creates a hydrogen atom. Now, this is part of Allah's physical creation. You can see how far removed in detail this is from simply saying Allah created the physical world, to saying Allah used His power, sent a message through light from outside the physical existence to both the electron and the proton, and told them that now is the time to stand close to each other in a certain type of, in a certain exact way that will manifest the characteristics that we call hydrogen. And so, when you look at it like that, and this is one of billions or trillions of different things that we could know about Allah's creation. And the more of them we know, the better we know Allah and His creation. So to know them in this very, very deep sense, to actually contemplate Allah sending this message, and this message coming from outside of space and time, through a little bit of light to the electron, and coming from outside of space and time, from a little bit of light to the proton, and telling the proton to act this way and the electron to act that way, and to relate to each other in a certain dynamic relationship that expresses the physical characteristic that we call hydrogen. This is very deep contemplation of the creation of Allah's physical world. And once we understand, I mean, that in itself is miraculous. And as I said, there are billions or there are trillions of different instances of this happening for us to contemplate. Every one of them a miracle almost beyond comprehension. So, sorry, I got off the track for a minute. Occasionally, when I'm thinking about these things, about this deep contemplation, they are very distracting. And if anything happens, I lose track of where I am in this process of contemplation. That one of the things we want to teach children from a very early age is to understand the universe on this basis of very deep contemplation. So with very, very young children, we teach them to contemplate simple things of Allah's creation, but at as deep a level as possible. And then as they get older, we teach them to understand more and more and be able to contemplate at a higher and higher level, until eventually in their lives they will be able to contemplate virtually every aspect that is known of Allah's physical creation. And when they reach that point, they will have reached such an intimate and close relationship with Allah that they could not possibly think to do anything except what Allah wants. And you notice I use the word they cannot think to do anything. So by this contemplation of the creation of Allah, they are actually altering their thinking processes so that they think in a different way. And they have thought about, in their lives by the time they are older, they have thought about many, many thousands of things in a very deep, intimate way in relationship to Allah's creation. When you know that much about Allah's creation, it is very hard to forget Allah. So then remembrance of Allah becomes easier. And all of these things are part of what results in a child growing up to be a Muslim of excellent character. And also, it is impossible to think thousands and thousands of times about this very deep contemplation of the creation of Allah without developing a relationship with Allah of great intimacy. I mean, if you understand, in the word, in the sense that I mean intimacy here, like for thousands of years, no one has known how Allah, well, I mean, for thousands of years, people didn't even know there were hydrogen atoms. And once they knew there were hydrogen atoms, they didn't know that they were a combination of a proton and an electron. And once they knew they were a combination of a proton and an electron, they didn't know how that the proton and electron got together. And then they at first thought that it was on a secular materialistic basis, according to some certain laws that exist within the universe that brought them together. Now we know the actual process that Allah uses, sending information by light from outside of space and time to create this hydrogen atom. So this is what I'm referring to as an intimate knowledge. See, we know closer and closer and closer to the actual mechanism. I mean, now we are to the point of actually contemplating Allah sending the message through light to do this certain thing, where before we had no idea that Allah had sent a specific message to tell the hydrogen atom to come together. And many people, probably even believers, would not have actually thought that Allah brought them together in this specific way. So it's just like with a person. If you know the person very, very well, you know intimate small things about their life. And so we know intimate small things about Allah's physical creation, which brings us much closer in our intimacy with Him. And one of the things that this generates is a great feeling of awe about the magnitude, the remarkable, I mean, we don't even have adjectives to describe how almost beyond imagination are the things that Allah has done to bring this physical creation together. And when you look at one, I mean, just the creation of a hydrogen atom is a thing to inspire awe. But then when you look at thousands of things, or many, many thousands of things in your life, at that level of deep contemplation, you then see that everything that Allah does is something deserving of our awe. That it is just, I mean, science can't make a hydrogen atom. We can put chemicals together that end up with hydrogen and something else, but the hydrogen and something else was already there and was going to bind in a certain way, which was already determined by Allah. It isn't that we actually do it. So what we get here, we get an understanding of Allah's creation, we get an intimate relationship with Allah, and we get a feeling of awe at the majesty of all that He has done. And once you have all that, it is very hard to not care about being a right person or being a right Khalifa of Allah. How can you think about all of those things and then, for example, want to go play a computer game? You know, I mean, the computer game becomes like nothing in your life. And these things are huge. So you have a choice. Do you want to go, after you have contemplated at this deep level the creation of Allah, and then you have a choice. Do I want to go study and hopefully get all A's on my exams, or do I want to go down to some cyber cafe and play computer games? Well, this level of intimacy and awe at the workings of Allah is going to alter your thinking, so that you are much more likely to make the choice to study and learn more rather than go and play some game that is rather meaningless. And as I had mentioned earlier, that one of the best ways to get children to be any certain way that you want them to be. Like on our list we had things like honesty and pious and kind and things like that. So you want your child to grow up with those qualities. And in the beginning, you reward those qualities in your child. And then slowly as your child is growing up, what you are doing is subtly moving from you being the one who is telling your child that those are good characteristics to have, and you externally rewarding those characteristics. The end goal, of course, is for the child, because how we think is how we are, is for the child to be thinking of himself as, I am someone who is kind, I am someone who is honest, I am someone who is helpful, I am someone who works hard. You know, all of these positive characteristics. And then, for them to, since they have understood the process that we put on the board before about how learning takes place, that they are saying to themselves things like if they do something very honest or very kind or very pious, they recognize that they have done that thing. And the recognition that they have done what Allah wants becomes very rewarding for them. So therefore increases in rate and magnitude what those behaviors. So then we started out with a little bundle of flesh that was just potential. And now we're up to a teenager, but eventually the teenager will be an adult. And then the adult will end up being an old person. And what ideally Islam is asking us to do, or Allah has asked us to do and then given us Islam as a way to achieve it, is to constantly be making progress. So you can see if a child starts out before they can even speak with these specific influences upon them for all of these positive Islamic characteristics, and then go through these various shaping stages where first the reward is external, and first the desire and motivation is external, then it becomes internal, then it becomes deeply internal, and then they have deep contemplation of the creation of Allah, which then supports this, and their relationship with Allah becomes closer and closer. And as their relationship with Allah becomes closer and closer, they become more and more committed to being the person, seeing themselves as a person who is all of those positive Islamic characteristics, and feeling great reward for showing and manifesting those Islamic characteristics. So you have sort of, here we have sort of the whole life, right? That takes place because a parent started with a plan for their child and then carried through that plan in a consistent way. So, and the nice thing is, if you did all that, it would work. And I can just absolutely guarantee you, if you did all those things I'm suggesting, it will work. Not everybody wants to spend the time doing all those things that I suggested, although they are not very hard things to do and they don't take very long, most of them. Another very, very critical thing is to, when your child is very, very young, develop a very close and warm and caring relationship with him. And to not let that relationship disappear as the child gets older. I mean, often people find it easy to be really kind and caring and loving to certainly babies. I mean, babies, we don't have any problem at all, even when they are little children. And then they reach some period, you know, probably somewhere around prepubescence, and then pubescence, and then adolescence, where very often the relationship between the parent and the child becomes not quite so close. And there is like a cooling of this warm relationship. And that is a very sad thing to happen. See, because this warm, caring, loving relationship is a thing that should be maintained through the whole life. And as we've spoken about before, if you want to be somebody who has some input into your child's life, even when they become an adult, you don't just automatically have that right. The child will not allow you that right just because you are their parent. They will allow you that right if you have been their parent, and if you have parented them well and been kind and warm to them, and the relationship is really good, then they will welcome your continued guidance. But if you do not do those things, please don't expect them to welcome your continued guidance. And we could end up like it is in America and some Western countries, where children at 15 or 16 are desperate to get out of the home and away from the parental influence and live on their own and do whatever they want to do, and virtually never see their parents. So this maintenance of the warm and caring relationship is absolutely critical. And it has to start young. I mean, you know, I said it had to start young, and you have to keep it. But it's very difficult if you don't start young to then at 10 years old or 15 years old decide that you want to have a warm and close relationship with your child when you haven't. Because you have become somebody who, in their mind, is someone that they don't have a close and warm relationship with. So it is hard to break into that. So it is very important that this start early and be maintained for a very long time. Another thing that is important to do, and this is with the older children, when they are old enough to essentially talk to you about any matter, and old enough to think logically. And I don't know exactly how old that is. I would say usually that would be somewhere between 5 and 10 years old. I think of myself a big gap. And then certainly with teenagers also. I mean, I'm saying that as young as somewhere between 5 and 10 you can start, but then you do with teenagers also. And that is to, because remember I've been talking over and over about how critical how we think is in regard to who we are. Because basically how we think is who we are. So we ask the child, we say, because we're assuming they've already learned about contemplation of Allah's creation, so they know how to think deeply. So we ask the child to look very, very deeply within themselves, be real honest with themselves, and say, what are the things that are within me? Whether they are bad behaviors or just ideas I have that are not consistent with the will of Allah, or thoughts that I have that are wrong thoughts, but they are wrong thoughts, and I don't just acknowledge them as wrong thoughts. They are wrong thoughts that appeal to me. And then you ask them to also look through their consciousness and find all of the good aspects, all of the good thoughts, all of the things that lead to good behavior, all of the things that are manifestations of good character. And you look at both of those realms, and then to make a conscious decision to start removing. You know, maybe they want to make a physical list, maybe they don't want to make a physical list, but actually starting using their thought processes and their inner speech to start removing those aspects that are within their consciousness, those messages that are written in there, and start making a conscious effort to use their inner speech to actually, since we can't really delete them, but we can override them and overwrite them so that they do not have an impact upon our behavior and our words and our thoughts. And those characteristics that are positive, of course, we, on the alternative, want to get them to do the same or the opposite thing and use their inner speech to build upon those things, to recognize, well, yes, I am honest, yes, I am kind, and then use their inner speech to build those and strengthen them. And to use this as a process that they continue through their life, so that they are constantly monitoring themselves to see what bad things have gotten in there, what did shaitan sneak into my consciousness today that can be harmful. And if I don't find it, it can stay in there and harm me. But if I find it, I can negate its power, stop its power upon me with my thoughts. So this is a very useful technique with children, particularly, sometimes parents with even relatively young children, they come to me, not that to be perfectly honest, I don't like to see anyone personally, because I know sometimes somebody will bring a child to see me, and they have an expectation that I can somehow or other fix that child, particularly in one visit. Many children with problems, if you want to use the word fix, I could be very helpful in fixing them if I knew them for a long time and I had a lot of control over the rest of their life. I mean, the other parts of their life. But to just bring somebody to talk to me is not very useful for the child. And often, one of the things that I notice is, and it's a very uncomfortable situation, the parent will bring the child, sit there with the child in front of me, talk to me about the bad things about the child. The child's hearing all this, and then say, can you say something to him to make him not bad? Well, in the first place, it's very difficult to know what to say to anyone to make them not bad. But remember we said how important perception is. This child is not going to be sitting there saying, oh, I can't wait till Brother Muhammad starts talking to me and telling me how I should be. The child's probably sitting there thinking, oh, this is so embarrassing, I wish I didn't have to do this. I want to get out of here as soon as possible. I don't care what he says. I just want to, get this over with and leave. So the chance of being successful is really not very great. So you have to get children to want to make the changes. And that is, this is this thing that I've talked about before about the motivational aspect and why the chicken has to weigh 80% of its free feeding weight and have motivation. The child has to have motivation. I recently had an instance, I won't give any indication who, but somebody brought a child to see me. And while the mother is telling me all this, and then she wants me to say something to the child is acting like this, sort of slouching way back in the seat. Like that, right? Now, do you think that I, being a clinical psychologist, that I would have very high hopes that I am going to reach that child? See, that child is telling me in a nonverbal way, I don't want to hear what you've got to say. If they don't want to hear what I've got to say, it's not going to change their thinking. It's not just a matter of what you say to them. It's a matter of what gets in. And then what they do with what gets in. So first we have to get it in, which means we have to get it past their perception. We have to set up a situation where they want to perceive what you have said to them. And then once you get it in, they also have to want to do something positive with it. So this is why I'm sure those of you who end up doing any counseling with children, or once you become known as people who know the things that we have talked about, there will be people coming to you with these kind of problems. And it is just really, really difficult when somebody comes up with a child that has problems and says, what can I do, or what can you do to fix them? I mean, you know, better to just give a real honest answer, which is probably not very much, unfortunately, unless you were going to do some long-term counseling. But this is one of the things that is going to come up. And many parents, and then the other thing is, I mean, sometimes you'll be sitting there and you know, if a parent comes with a child, it's not only the child that you see, their behavior and the way they talk, but you see the parent and the way they act and their nonverbal communication and the way they talk. And you may know, without ever having to ask, that this is a person who doesn't pay very much attention to their child, who gives in to their child at wrong times. You know, you can just tell this from the parent and the child and the little bit of interaction that you see. And you know, often I will just come right out and say to the person, I'm pretty sure this happens. And they'll say, oh, no, I don't do that. Well, what, are you going to argue with somebody about what they do or don't do? I mean, the reality is the child became who the child became, particularly if the child is young, mainly by the influence of the parents. So this thing about where we ask the children to look through their consciousness and look for the bad messages that have got written in there and try and use their inner speech to take away their power, and use their inner speech to find and once they find the positive aspects, use their inner speech to increase them. We might want to be telling the parents to do the same thing. And why I actually led into that is that if somebody does come to you with a child who is in a the parent considers badly behaved in some way, and they probably are, it might not be a bad starting point to ask the child, or through the parent, if they are willing to do this sort of, you might call it a psychic cleansing process, where, you know, that thing I was just talking about, I don't want to put an official name on it. Listen, we don't want it to end up calling the psychic cleansing process forever. It's just the name I put on it for the moment. But where you do look through your consciousness for those things that are good and those things that are bad, try and wipe out the effect of the bad and increase the effect of the good. It might be a reasonable way to start when somebody comes in with a child and says to you, what can I do? If they can get the child to do that as a beginning, it would be quite a good start. The child doesn't have to do it perfectly. Right? The child just really has to do it to some degree. All of these things we talk about, it would be nice if every one of them was done perfectly, but very few people are going to be doing any of them perfectly. The nice thing is they are all such powerful techniques that they can be done quite imperfectly and still have a large impact. And then another thing, which I mean, it sounds just so much like obvious common sense, but it needs to be said, that parents and children need to talk about all sorts of things regarding the child's development and their behavior and their attitudes. And these need to, once again, if you start young and the child is used to it, it will be comfortable to do later on. It is hard to start with someone who is a surly 16-year-old and have a nice intimate chat about their character and their behavior. But this idea of a lot of times, I think parents and children don't really understand each other and why things are going on and why they are the way they are and why certain communications break down and all the different problems, and really need to have a lot of talks. But one of the things that I've noticed is parents often want to have a talk about these important matters with their child after something has gone wrong. And maybe the child is upset or the parent is upset. Believe me, this is not the time to have an intimate discussion about your relationship. You know, you want to pick a time that is a really nice time, when feelings are good. You don't want to pick a time when feelings are bad to have one of these talks about, you know, deep and meaningful personal issues and relationships. And because human beings are communicating beings and they are logical beings, one of the things that it almost seems like magic, and of course it isn't magic. I mentioned earlier in this talk that I don't really like even the idea of magic and wish magic was not around. But that sometimes you can just say to a child, you know, this thing you are doing, it is really harmful to you and those around you for these reasons. And if you were to do this other thing and suggest a specific thing to them, and then say, you know, if you do that, you're really going to be a lot happier in your life. Things are going to go a lot better. And sometimes, as simple a thing as that, and the child will change. And it is almost like a miracle. It's not a miracle, I mean, but it looks like it. You know, you do so little, and you get so much. I may have mentioned, I don't know whether I mentioned one of these talks or not. Normally, I never agree to see children privately with their parents. In other words, to do individual counseling. I very, very rarely agree. Somebody who was a close friend of a close friend of mine called me and wanted me to do it, and I said I didn't want to. But they pressured me sufficiently that my alternative was either to be very rude or to go ahead and say I would do it. So I went ahead and I said I would do it. And they brought their child over, and it was really clear to me that their child was just manipulating the heck out of them. And the child was about 6 or 7 years old. And I mean, I could just even see the look on his face as he was asked a question, and he would give a manipulative answer. And I would see this little thing cross his face, like, I just got away with that. And since they had pressured me to see them anyway, I said, look, I'm just going to be really honest with you. And so I told them these things that I was seeing. And I thought I had offended them fairly badly. And the child, of course, every time I would ask him a question, he would give me a manipulative type answer also. It was really clear he was not being honest with me at all. I mean, things that I knew for sure that he had done. And I would say, did you do this? He'd say, no. It's okay. So anyway, we talked for a couple of hours, and then I didn't see these people again for about 2 years, and I met them at a function 2 or 2.5 years later. And the child's mother came up to me and she said, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you again." She said, "I just had to tell you." She said, "Our child, he's just totally changed. You know, all those things that were wrong about him before, he's really well behaved, and he works hard in school, and he's getting good grades, and he's very motivated." And I thought, oh, did I ever misjudge? I mean, I thought there had been like no effect at all. And I thought it was just a waste of all of our time. So you can never be sure, right, when these messages go in. This is this amazing thing about writing messages in someone's consciousness. Something must have clicked in that boy's consciousness. And it wasn't me. I mean, I thought I failed with them. So somehow or other, something that had gone on, he took it and it changed the way that he thought. And in changing the way that he thought, it changed who he was. And he changed himself into becoming somebody who was all the good things that his parents had hoped for. So I'm just mentioning this because it is within the range of possibility. We never want to discount how much an input into the consciousness can be. I think I had mentioned earlier that from a therapeutic point of view, using this method, which might be called communication therapy, that theoretically there is one communication that you could give to any person that would make any particular change that that person wanted to make. The whole trick is finding that particular communication. In this case, I thought I hadn't found it, and apparently did find it, but didn't know that I found it, so can't take any credit for it. And the child did it on his own. The parents, of course, thought that it was me who had done this virtually miraculous therapy, and you know, thankfully, I'm not working doing this full time, because people could tell someone else, and then they come with an expectation, you know, which I would be unable to meet.
But did the parents change their ways also?
Well, I don't know them very well at all. I mean, I met them for 5 minutes again 2.5 years later, where they were just saying everything was working better. I assume, I mean, you know, I did give them some specific suggestions about, because they were clearly parents who were far overindulgent with their child, just gave him absolutely everything he wanted just because he wanted it. And I suggested that that is not really the way the world is, that it is best for children to get what they want for something, not for nothing. Because you can grow up with an expectation then that the world is going to keep giving you things, and you have no responsibility to even be a right person to be deserving of those things. So I would assume that the parents made some changes also. But it was a very pleasant experience to find out that this child I'd worried about him for a long time. He was such an absolutely excellent manipulator. I think he was about 8 or 9 years old. But he was far more sophisticated than the parents at the techniques of manipulation through communication. He was one of the best I'd seen for a long time. Then we need to talk a little bit about the weakness of punishment. Of course, punishment always seems like a really good idea, because if you punish somebody, particularly if you use harsh physical punishment, somebody is doing something you don't like, and you punish them harshly and physically, they usually stop doing the thing you don't like. And when people stop doing what you don't like, it is found rewarding, and so you think, oh, I'm on to a really good deal with punishment. My suggestion on punishment is that in an ideal world, in a right Islamic world, we would have virtually no punishment because nobody would be doing anything wrong. even in an unideal world, punishment is always harmful because there are negative side effects to punishment. And it is only occasionally you can stop a bad behavior with punishment. But it is never the case that you can instill, put into the heart, a love of a good behavior with punishment. And when you punish a child, basically a number of things will happen. The child will, most of us do, say for instance, a parent hits a child. Most of us don't have very good feelings toward people who hit us. So the child would have bad feelings toward the parent. If you are around a situation where you know somebody might hit you, you try and stay away from that person. So you might be escaping from the situation. Then you might also be so angry that you want to retaliate. And kids resort to vandalism and doing things in other places that they know their parents don't want to do. And in America, unfortunately, apparently a new trend has come up, which is instead of the term child abuse, they're now using this term parental abuse, that the teenage children are physically abusing their parents. If their parents don't do what they want, instead of, before it had been, if the child didn't do what the parent wanted, some parents would abuse the child. Now, when the children are getting to be teenagers, and with the way of life as it is in the U.S. and some Western countries now, because of all the wrongs that have been learned and all of the wrongs that have been accepted as right, that children will actually, if they can't get what they want from their parents, that they actually physically abuse them, beat them up. So basically I want to say punishment has great weakness, and that a great psychologist of the 20th century once said, we are only beginning to understand the weakness of force and aggression as we are beginning to understand the power of love. That's a very important statement. Basically what he's saying is reward is so much more successful than punishment. Punishment looks like sometimes you get what you want, but you get so many negative side effects. Plus the fact that punishment basically only works when the punishing contingency or the punishing opportunity is right there. Like if you're at home and you get punished for a certain thing, you might do more of it when you are outside, and your parents aren't going to see you, so you can go ahead and get away with it. And then for everything else, basically, the way we are treated is the way we learn to treat others. So you have children growing up thinking that if people don't do what you want, using force and aggression on them to get what you want is an acceptable way of life. And we see then this manifested in geopolitical relations such as America and George Bush now. If a country doesn't do what they want, we just go in and hurt them as bad as we can. And then maybe people will be so scared of us that they wouldn't dare not do what we say to do. The specific Islamic rules of punishment is you don't jump right in and hit the child in the beginning. Although you are allowed to hit a child in Islam, there are some very strict rules about it, that you should first try and reason with the child. If you cannot reason with the child, you try to you withdraw your positive attention from the child because of their behavior. In other words, you don't give them you still love them, but you don't express that love to them because they are acting badly. And as a last resort, they can be beaten. Only as an absolute last resort if there is no positive alternative. And in Islam, you are not supposed to beat a child if you are angry. And most children are beaten by parents when the parent is angry. It is a rare thing for a parent to beat a child when they are not angry. And when you are angry, it's almost sure that you're not beating the child for the child's best interest, but for your own personal satisfaction to reduce maybe some anger. And Islamically, even if you're not angry, you're not supposed to hit the child in the face or the stomach, because those are places where there are delicate organs that can be damaged easily. You're not allowed to hit the child more than 3 times, and you should not use an implement to hit the child. The hand is best, and you should not hit the child hard enough to leave a bruise or break the skin. So you can see how merciful Islam is, even when it says punishment can be used. It's a very merciful form of punishment. So there's not really much more for me to say. I've said a lot of different things, and if you did all of them, of course, you will have great success in raising your child. But maybe you don't want to do all of them. So I've broken this down into 3 very, very easy to understand, easy to remember, simple things to do, that if you do these 3 simple things, you will see some positive change in your child. It's virtually guaranteed if you do these things. And anybody can do them. The first one is you teach your child their Khalifa of Allah and what it means, to the best of your ability. Right? If you don't know all that much yourself, then you won't be able to teach them that much. But you teach them that they are Khalifa of Allah with those 3 responsibilities: to make themselves good, to help others become good, and to help the physical world become good. And then every day you find several ways. Try and find nice ways, and try and find different ways. Try and make it sort of interesting for the child. You know, don't bore them just by saying, if I say to them at least 3 times every day, you are Khalifa of Allah. So the parent every day says to the child 3 times, you are Khalifa of Allah, you are Khalifa of Allah, you are Khalifa of Allah, feeling they have fulfilled that responsibility. Of course they haven't. You need to do it in different ways. You need to get the idea deeply into the consciousness of the child that they are Khalifa of Allah. Because once they realize that they are Khalifa of Allah, as we talked about earlier in this discussion, they will be extremely motivated to act on the fact that they are Khalifa of Allah. So the first thing you do is teach your child they are Khalifa of Allah, and daily remind them several times in different and nice ways that they are Khalifa of Allah. That is the first thing to do. The second thing to do is, with any positive things you see your child do or say, or positive characteristics that they show, give them some very warm and loving praise for those things. Not just, that's good, that's good, that's good. No, that is not warm and loving praise. You need to find different variations, and I understand culturally in some languages it is easy to give lots of praise. Some languages culturally it is difficult to give lots of praise. If it happens that in Bahasa Melayu it is difficult to give a lot of praise, then give as much as you can, and then you'll start to feel more comfortable giving it. In the future you'll find other ways to give it, and you can give more and more. But the important thing is to be sure that you give positive notice through kind and loving praise for the good things your children do and the good characteristics that they show. The third thing that you need to do is set firm, reasonable rules for your children. Explain to them why the rules are, and why they are good, and why they are necessary. And then enforce those rules consistently. Not just every once in a while when you're annoyed enough at the child for them breaking them, right? Because then the child learns that they don't know whether the rule is really a rule, or whether it will really be applied, or whether you really mean it, or all sorts of things. So if you set a rule, you apply it consistently. So you set firm, reasonable rules, explain them to your child, enforce them consistently with what I refer to as kind discipline. And I'll give an example from the Sunnah of our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, what I would consider kind discipline. It's quite a famous hadith about when our Prophet came up to a date tree orchard and he saw a young boy throwing big rocks at the trunks of the date trees, and it would shake the trees and some of the dates would fall down. But it was also damaging the bark on the trees. When you damage the bark on the tree, and it's like opening a wound on the skin on a human being, and it allows an opportunity for disease to go in. So our Prophet says to the boy, you know, every time you hit one of those trees with a rock like that, you are damaging that tree. And he might have said, I'm not sure whether he did or not, he might have said, and it would be a good idea if he had said, I would say, and remember who these trees really belong to. These trees, you know, they don't belong to the farmer who's growing these dates. These trees belong to Allah. They are part of Allah's creation. And do you want to harm Allah's creation? Of course, the boy will say no. And so the Prophet would say to the boy, you know, what would really be a lot better to do is just wait until the dates get ripe enough. They will automatically fall. You don't have to throw big rocks at the tree and hurt the tree. And would you be willing to do that? And the boy would say, yes, I would. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sort of, if you know this term, ruffled the boy's hair, which means went like that with his hand on the boy's head, and then made a dua over him, and then just walked off. And this boy remembered that all his life, never threw any more rocks at trees, was very glad for the advice that he got, felt very good about getting the advice from the Prophet Muhammad, and changed his behavior. See, so he did a wrong thing. He was corrected for it with kind discipline. The kind discipline, the words of kind discipline changed how he thought, and it didn't give any bad feelings toward our Prophet. It gave only good feelings. These good feelings are maintained, and we're still reading about them 1,400 years later as a nice example. This is how we should treat our children. Can you imagine, I mean, if the hadith was, you know, Prophet Muhammad saw this boy throwing stones at the date trees, so he walked up to him and slapped him a couple of times really hard and said, if I ever catch you doing that again, you know, I'll beat you for an hour. Well, you know, I don't know, maybe the boy would stop doing it. He would certainly be really careful the Prophet was not around when he did it. But he's not going to, in his heart, he's not going to think, oh, damaging trees is really a terrible thing. And he's not going to be thinking about our beloved Prophet Muhammad as he should be, what a wonderful man he is. He's going to think, oh, what a terrible man he is, and you know, sees me doing something wrong and comes up and beats me. See, so Prophet Muhammad, of course, knew how, because he was an example, he's the most perfect example of how people should be. We should take that example. Prophet Muhammad wanted to deal with children through harsh discipline. He would have dealt with harsh discipline. Never once in his life is there any record of him dealing with children with any kind of harsh discipline. Not only physical blows, but never even harsh words. So he used kind discipline all the time. So we would expect that we should also use kind discipline. Kind discipline is effective and harsh discipline is not. So you do those three things. Teach your child their Khalifa of Allah and remind them every day that they are in various ways. Keep an eye out for the good things your children do or the good characteristics they have and give them warm and loving praise for those things. And 3, set firm rules for the children. Explain why those rules are good rules. Apply them consistently and do so with kind discipline without harshness. If you do those 3 simple things, absolute guarantee you'll see positive change in your children. So it couldn't be a whole lot easier than that. I mean, I think there's probably nobody here doing this, and nobody who is going to see the CD could not, if they chose to, do those three simple things. And it's not going to take a lot of your life. You don't have to learn a lot of things. You know, you don't have to change all that much. Just do those three simple things, and you will improve the development of your children. And when you are on the second one about the rewarding of the children by the warm praise for the good things that they do, of course, you start doing this all externally. But as soon as possible, you want to try and shift that reward from being external reward to internal reward, so that you don't have to keep going up to your child saying, it's really nice that you did that, it's really wonderful that you did that, and you know, this is a really good thing to do. In the beginning, to get them moving in a positive direction, you need to do that. But then you need to slowly shift it until the reward is internal for them. And you do that by saying things to them like, I'll bet you feel good when you do, say for instance, a little girl that just helped her younger brother do something. I bet you feel really good when you help your younger brother, because that's such a nice thing to do. And it makes you feel really good. And then the little girl will think in her mind, you know, yeah, I do feel good when I help my little brother. So next time, when you are there, not there to see it, and she helps her little brother, she's very likely to think in her mind, yeah, I feel really good when I help my little brother. So you get the children to end up being self-rewarding or self-reinforcing internally. And although with little kids, you know, if they are real little kids and they do something good, you might go, oh, that was just so wonderful. Oh, that was just great, you know. And you can exaggerate. But if you have a teenager and you act like that, then they say, ooh, how come you're so weird? You see, so as children get older, we need to use and find more and more sophisticated ways to reward them. And another important thing is, and this is one of the reasons why these good ideas that I've been talking about here, which is like a Khalifa way of parenting, should also be like a Khalifa way of life. And because one of the things that I had said, if you want to raise good Muslim children, you only have to do two things: give them a good Islamic home to grow up in, and a good Islamic society to go out into. But if you're not getting the society ready for your child to go out into, then the positive things you do won't be so successful. So one of the ways to help your child go out into a good Islamic society, because we can't change all of society right away, is to have a group of friends and relatives who you can talk about these same ideas to, and hopefully they will teach their children these same kind of things that you are teaching your children about the importance of being Khalifa of Allah, of helping them, making themselves good, helping others become good, and helping the physical world to become good, so that your children have friends and relatives outside the home to associate with who are a positive peer influence. So this is really part of a parent's responsibility, particularly when they are younger. Hopefully by the time, if you're starting with very young children now, hopefully by the time they are teenagers, we'll have a much better society, and you'll be able to find lots and lots of kids around who are good influences. But in the beginning, you may have to not just find, but create a community around you that is a good Islamic community. And do so by helping people to learn these techniques. And probably the concept that I will end on is that we should all have, and we should give to our children, the idea that Islam has been going down and down for hundreds of years, and the time has come to just say, no, we are stopping here. Because if we don't stop, we just keep going down and down and down. Shaitan's not going to give up trying to influence us. So we have to take our responsibility as Khalifa of Allah and stop the influence of Shaitan, stop the slide of the Ummah down, down, down into secular materialism, and who knows what might even be worse than that. And we lose our beautiful practice and beliefs of Islam, where the alternative is, what we have to have somewhere along the line is a transforming generation. A generation that is the one who just say, no, we are not going to go down anymore, we are going to start back up. And parents should, because when you're older, it's maybe a little bit harder to somehow give up everything that you are and do and become part of that transforming generation. But it is very, very important to give that idea to your children, that they have the potential to be this transforming generation and to literally remake the world from the terrible place that it is now into a world that is exactly as Allah would want it to be, which is so far from this one we can barely see that world from here. And it is going to empower them to understand that they are part of this transforming generation. And not only do you want to get them to understand they are part of this transforming generation, but you want to get them to understand that they have every right to expect success, because Allah has told us that we can do this. And Allah is not going to lie to us. So we want to then raise up a young ummah that is going to be seeing itself as the transforming generation, to transform Islam from something that has been on a long slide for hundreds of years, to start our ummah right back up to the top of everything, and to fully expect to succeed, and to spread this among hundreds of millions of young Muslims across the world, and get them motivated to really do that, change the ummah, and eventually change the world. And so that's basically the talk on parenting. If you do a whole lot of it, you'll get a whole lot of positive result. And I mean a whole lot, a real lot. You would be virtually guaranteed to raise children of excellent Islamic character. If you do a little bit of it, you are virtually guaranteed to see some positive changes in your children. So it's a thing that is very hard to take a loss from. And not only is it nice to see positive changes in your children, but basically the whole family dynamic and the relationship between everyone in the family can become nicer when the children get to be nicer because of the use of these techniques. And it is a lot of fun to be nice to children. It's very enjoyable to say a lot of positive things to kids, and it's not very enjoyable to use harsh words with kids. So, thank you very much for letting me have this discussion with you. And I hope, just as we want these ideas to sink deep into the consciousness of our children, we would like them to sink deep into your consciousness. And if these ideas sound reasonable to you, you should change your thinking. And then when you change your thinking, you will change your behavior. You will start acting and using some of these ideas from Khalifa parenting, which are very powerful. And after you start using them, you'll see some success. And then after you see some success, you'll want to use them more and more, because anything we get rewarded for, we tend to increase in rate and magnitude, until you end up using a whole lot of what we have said in this talk. And then you'll see really big changes in your children. And then your friends and your neighbors and your relatives, they'll see these big changes in your kids, and they'll be having problems, and they'll be saying, wow, what are you doing right that's making all these positive changes in your kids? And it gives you the opportunity then to say to them, well, there are these fairly simple things that are just based on the concept of being Khalifa of Allah, and if you'd like to know, we can discuss them, and then pass them on to someone else. because eventually we would like every Muslim in the world to be using these techniques with every other Muslim, and particularly when we raise our children. So I hope the talk has had some value and some meaning, and I thank you very much for allowing me to come and give it to you. And Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters.